Good evening.
Hi, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker and the topic somewhat. The topic, I'll only say this, even though the book was written some time ago and the doctor speaks about his experiences, what? Published recently, but he's speaking about things that happened in the 60s. It's really almost as if it was from today's headlines. So that's about the book. It's very interesting just for that reason alone. And the speaker, you're all familiar with him. He's been speaking on club for a long time. He also gives excellent shiurim in community in congregation Torah or for many years. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Marty Levine.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the two of them. I employed them both as my warm-up act. They've been warming up for me for many, many years. Anyhow, the name of the book is Extracted. The subtitle of the book is Unmasking Rampant Anti-Semitism in America's Higher Education. And in this case, we're going to focus on Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, which at the time of this story had a dental school which no longer exists. Oh, a special shout out before we go any further to Larry Fish, who without him really set up all the technical stuff, and we could not have done this, and Larry's giving up his evening to sit here and to suffer through this. The author of the book is what I'm going to be presenting tonight is Perry Brickman, a DDS, that's a Doctor of Dental Science or Surgery, whatever it is. The foreword to the book was written by a very, very famous person you should all be familiar with. Her name is Deborah Lipstadt. Where do we know Deborah Lipstadt from? Right, right now she holds the position of the Doro Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies at Emory University. She was a close friend of Perry Brickman, and we'll talk about how the two of them got together. The book itself was published in January of 2020 by a small publishing company, which I never heard of, called Morgan James. Okay, and I personally bought this book on Amazon, and it is available on Amazon. And the book is a very, very quick and easy read if you want to read it. The book itself, the dedication, Perry Brickman dedicates this to his dad, Paul Meyer Brickman. We'll talk about him, okay, for his determination and encouragement to make a second chance possible for me being Perry Brickman. And he dedicates it also to all his dental school classmates who, after years of anguish, they were willing to open up their hearts and souls and share their long suppressed stories. Most of them went on to successful careers, both successes in financial, social, and they experienced it and were willing to talk about the emotional challenges that they faced at Emory because of what Emory University did to them. We'll get into it, right? So let's go. Story starts in the book, at least, on a late summer day in the year 2006. When Brickman and his wife, okay, attended an exhibit on the history of the Jewish life in Emory University. And as they were walking through all the panels in the exhibits, they were astonished to come face to face with documents that strongly suggested that Brickman and many others had been failed out of Emory's dental school because they were Jewish. No other reason, because they were Jewish. Perry, on his own, decided to embark on an uncharted path to uncover truth. With no initial allies, plenty of resistance, Brickman, who was a practicing dentist by the time he was retired, okay, awoke each morning determined to continue extracting evidence hidden deep and previously unmined in deep and unmined archives. While the overt discrimination was displayed in charts and graphs, the names of the victims were scrupulously withheld. The ability of the perpetrators of this anti-Semitism to silence all opposition and the willingness of the Jewish community to submit to the establishment were deeply troubling to Brickman as he continued to dig deeper into the issue. Extracted, the book itself brings to light the human element of rampant anti-Semitism that affected the dental profession in mid-20th century America. The personal tragedies, the faces, and the individual stories of shame and humiliation. After 6 years of identifying, interviewing, and recording the victims, Brickman was finally able to present his documentary evidence to Emory officials. And the book, the heart of the book, is Brickman's how he went about doing this. This was a college, a dentist, who had no experience in computers, was very, very much a man of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and he had to learn investigative techniques, how to learn computers, how to spend time in libraries, etc., etc. Okay. He was able to track down students who were dismissed by Emory University from 1948 to 1962. So it's a period of about 15 years who were rejected and dismissed by Emory for the sole reason that they were Jews. Right? The book's most poignant parts are those interviews with students who were expelled and the effect it had on their lives. Some were devastated by what they thought was their failure. Others went into severe depression. They couldn't face or explain to their parents and families that they were failures, that they had flunked out of college. Remember, most of us, when we went to college, I mean, if we came home with a C or we didn't do well in school, it was like a shanda. How are you going to go explain it to your parents, especially when Perry's parents were Lithuanian Jews who had saved and slaved their whole lives to send their son to dental school, and he comes home after the end of the first year and he gets a letter in the middle of the summer that you're dismissed from school. And you go to your parents and you say, Mom, Pop, I didn't do anything. I don't know. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. You know, we all grew up that the teacher was always right? The school, the Rebbe was always right. The teacher was always right. So failure in school to our generation in the 50s and 60s, and certainly to our parents, was considered to be, for want of a better word, a shanda, right? Come across many of the interviews where many of the students who were flunked out were able to pick themselves up somehow, get into other dental schools, go on to other successful fields, and almost everyone that Terry interviewed did manage to make a success in their lives. I said earlier that our story started in the summer of 2016 when the Brickmans was invited to Emory to view this exhibition. But the story, our real story, starts in the summer of 1951. Dr. Brickman himself always wanted to be a dentist. As a kid, for some reason, he wanted to be a dentist. This was going to be his life's work. In 1949, he enrolled in Emory University's pre-dental program, which consisted at the time of 2 years of college and pre-dental courses. In the fall of 1950, he entered Emory University's dental school. Now, a word about Emory's dental school. It was easy to get in, okay? There was discrimination that took place was not in the application process and not in the entry process. It was once you got into Emory, what the dean of the dental school, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, what the dean did and what the professors did once you were there, right? During the first semester that Dr. Brickman went to school, spanning 1950, the fall of 50 to the summer of 1951, Dr. Brickman performed well, and he was looking forward to continue his schooling in the fall of 1951. In the summer, however, he received a notice for memory, that he failed out of school, and he was not invited back to attend the fall semester. When Brickman failed out of Emory University's dental school in 1951, his parents, Lithuanian Jews, whose family immigrated ultimately to Tennessee, where Brickman was raised, were disconsolate. Quote, he says, "My mom had really worked hard all our life. I was going to be her boy. It was really upsetting to her when I flunked out. My dad got real quiet." Brickman paused. Quote, "They did live to see me graduate from dental school with honors, but they always thought if I'd worked harder, I would have made it at Emory. Unfortunately, they didn't live long enough to hear the end of the story and the apology that was given to each of these people who were discriminated against by the university." Brickman gives us a brief overview during the book also of the history of the genteel, mild history of anti-Semitism that existed in the southern United States from the years 1900 to 1950. And he gives us a brief overview of the history of anti-Semitism at the major colleges and universities in the United States throughout that period. Included are shocking quotes from the president of Harvard, Columbia, and other colleges regarding their acceptance policies and their feelings towards Jews attending their college. And the book points them out, but to do that would go away from the book. Brickman traces the anti-Semitism of the dental profession, which is I want to hone in on, okay, to the parent organization, the ADA, which stands for the American Dental Association. In the 1940s, the ADA formed a council on dental education in an attempt to improve the field. The organization hired a consultant by the name of Harlan H. Horner, who published a report in 1940, and the report is in the book, suggesting all the ways dental schools could do better. One important step in the report was admitting fewer Jews. What he said in his report, admit fewer Jews. Harlan wrote in the report that 36% of the dental students came from 4 states, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Pennsylvania, which at the time in the 30s and 40s and 50s had the highest percentage of Jewish population, right? And he said that all those students somehow are all from the same, quote, immigrant background. In other words, they're Jewish. Maybe a few were Italian, but this is not good. We need I'm quoting him now, the report. We need representation of all people. If you're in a dental school in Georgia, you need a good old country boys. You shouldn't have any Jews. Some of this made sense. He wanted students from everywhere. It sounds real good, but he obviously had an agenda. The ADL leaked the story to the New York Times, and the American Dental Association was forced to issue a statement saying, don't worry about it, they'll never agree to Horner's recommendations. If you take a look at the handouts I gave you, one of in the back, you'll see the report that was published in the New York Times, right? But it was too late. By the time the story reached the Times, The Horner Commission had already approached individual dental schools, urging them to take action. One of the schools was Temple University. When Brickman visited its archives, he said, quote, "I found a letter the dean of the dental school wrote to the president saying that his number one accomplishment was improving the school's horrible physical plant. And get this, number two was that 4 years ago, he said, 72% of the freshman class was of the Jewish persuasion, and now it's only that 24%. They said it wasn't anti-Semitism or anything against Jews. It's just that we're admitting too many students from New York State. But the number of Jews still went from 72% to 24%. Brickman describes how he went through old yearbooks from dozens of dental schools, and he did this all on his own time and investigation and money, to see how Jewish student populations changed in the wake of the Horner Commission. Quote, "I looked at names and fraternities, and if it was a name you couldn't really tell but was married to Sadie Goldberg, I knew a boy was Jewish." Sure enough, he found the number of Jews in dental schools, even Columbia, plummeted. Quote, "It was a conspiracy. No question about it," he said. On January 21st, 1948, Dr. Horner, who was the author of this report we're talking about, he retired. But he had a young and upcoming friend and colleague by the name of Dr. John Bueller. And John Bueller is cast as the villain in our story. In September of 1948, he assumed the deanship of the Emory School of Dentistry in Atlanta. He continued and improved on Dr. Horner's anti-Semitic rhetoric and tactics. His deanship, if there's such a word, was to continue until 1961, when he was exposed for his anti-Semitic practices and allowed or forced to retire. Bueller devised an application form to Emory, which is reproduced in the book, and I have it all in the back. Quote, "It asks the following questions on an application." Now compare this to what we call woke, being woke today. Quote, "It asks for the religion of the applicant." 2, it asked for the father's religion and birthplace. It required 3 letters of reference, one of which had to be a letter from your spiritual pastor. Of course, Jews didn't have pastors, so they had rabbis. And listen to this one. Your race. You were given 3 choices: Christian, Jew, or other. In the back, I have that application reproduced so you can see the application for yourself. In a chapter entitled "Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire," Dr. Brickman describes his 1 year. Remember I said 2 years pre-dental, 1 year in dental? He describes his year in Emory Dental School and the anti-Semitic remarks and harassment he was subject to by his instructors and professors. Some students couldn't take it and resigned and left school. Remarks such as, quote, "Jews just don't have the hands," unquote, were made by professors to students. And, quote, that cavity, when the professor would look at your work, he would say, "That cavity must have been filled by a Jew." And these and other remarks were made to Dr. Brickman over and over again. Bueller's entire staff in the dental school was infected with anti-Semitism, including his secretarial staff, who, when students came to see Bueller for an explanation of why they were failed and flunked out of school with no reason. When they thought they were doing well, the secretary would respond, "He's too busy. You were flunked out because you were Jewish." So there was no attempt on the part of Emory University to hide what they were doing. And as I said to you, this went on for many, many years, 48 to 1961. The Times dictated that the resulting embarrassment to those who flunked out was considered to be a shanda and kept secret. Nobody spoke about it. The people that was affected by it didn't want to say anything about it. They were embarrassed. No student shared his experience with any other student. As I said, all went on with their lives, some for the worse, others were able to pick up their lives. Brickman says there were 4 Jewish boys who entered Emory with me, 4 Jewish boys in my class. All 4 of us got kicked out. Can you imagine the humiliation? We were so embarrassed, we didn't speak to each other about it for 50 years. We avoided each other. My wife called us a fraternity of silence. Most of the Jewish dental students who failed, and Brickman found more than 100, weren't allowed to continue. Others were given a second chance and had to repeat the first year, right? Brickman himself wound up going into University of Tennessee Dental School, where he graduated with high honors in 1956. High honors. He gives his grades, 98 in this course, A+ in this course. He was a model outstanding student. He went on to co-found the Georgia Society of Oral and, I hope I pronounced this, Ron Berger is listening to me, Oral and Maxillofacial Surgeons, to sit on the Georgia Board of Dental Examiners, and ultimately become president of the Atlanta Jewish Federation. He was extremely accomplished. Now I want to fast forward back to the start of the story, which I spoke to you about in the summer of 2006. As I said, in 2006, Brickman was invited to an exhibit about the history of the Jews at Emory. It was curated by an Eric Goldstein of the Tom Institute for Jewish Studies, which still exists at Emory. Brickman stopped in front of one particular panel and froze. The 5th panel was on anti-Semitism at Emory. He said, quote, "I was stunned. I saw a bar graph showing that 65% of us flunked out or had to repeat years. And I said, quote, oh my God, the 4 of us were not the only ones." In your handouts in the back, you'll see the panel that he saw from University, indicating the graph of the 65%, actually 64.2. Okay, the graph was made from data provided by the Anti-Defamation League in 1961. Tipped off to Bueller's actions, the ADL had presented a wealth of evidence about Bueller's behavior to Emory University, which then compelled Bueller to resign. Bueller wasn't censured, and he went on to other academic jobs. And the story stayed quiet from the mid-60s until 2006. After seeing the exhibit, Brickman was determined to make sure everyone knew the truth. He visited libraries, archives all over the country, and interviewed Jews who had spent time in Emory. And a good deal of the book is taken up by these one-to-one interviews on how they felt as kids being flunked out, how they had to face their parents, the feeling of rejection that lasted with them for many, many years. A major part of the book consists of Dr. Brickman's efforts to get the truth out. It's one thing knowing that this took place, but something within Dr. Brickman moved him that he couldn't let this fact that he found out sit still. And as I said, with no experience as an investigator, as a writer, as a researcher, he took it upon himself in retirement to get the story out. It took him 5 years, from 2006 to 2011. But by 2011, Dr. Brickman had collected sufficient evidence to prove anti-Semitism and racial discrimination against Jews beyond a shadow of a doubt. What was he now to do with the information? What do you do with this? Who do you go to? Okay? How was he going to disseminate it? In addition, he had a burning passion to correct an injustice in all the involved cases. His classmates and others who were hurt emotionally and carried a scar of failure for 40 to 50 years. Major Jewish organizations, including the ADL, the Jewish Federation of Atlanta, influential former students, and friends that he networked with helped him, right? The major lifting ultimately was done, and he credits her in his forward, by Deborah Lipstadt, right? Deborah Lipstadt, I explained to you. Deborah Lipstadt was had a very famous case where she went to court against David Irving. David Irving was a British author and was a known Holocaust denier, right? Following her case, others that helped him were Deborah Lauder of the ADL Southeast Regional Director from the years 2001 to 2006. She later moved on to become the National Civil Rights Director of ADL from 2006 to 2015, and President of the ADL Southeast Region from 2015 to 2017. The two of them were the major lifters in helping Perry get this story out publicly. Most shocking of all, in 2011, Dr. Brickman presented his findings to Emory University, okay? And a beautiful, moving part of the story is that in 2011, when Emory saw the investigations and his work that he had done, Emory University helped Dr. Brickman almost as much as anybody, okay, as part of their, I want to call it, it's part of their tshuva process to get the story out. Okay. He writes in the book, his neighbor, Emory Professor Deborah Lipstadt, heard about this project. He says, quote, I saw her in shul, and she said, why haven't you clued me into what you're doing? Why haven't you showed me what you're doing? Right? Emory had just backed her at this trial with David Irving. So he said, I didn't want to bother you. You didn't have a clear enough mind to handle this. Besides, you belong to Emory. You're part of their staff. I don't want to conflict you. She said to him, no, look, send it to me. I dropped by her house and didn't hear from her for 2 weeks and thought, uh-oh. But then she wrote. He writes as follows. She usually writes terse emails, not with good grammar, because they're just emails. But this one was long and eloquent. She told me how much she loved it. Apparently, what he had done was to produce a documentary of his findings. Right? She said, right is right and wrong is wrong. You did this the right way. You were objective. This has to be a book, and we have to make this into a movie. She and a few others got me to present the documentary to the VP of Emory. He said, quote, this is not Emory. And I said, not now, but it was. And he said, "What do you want us to do?" I said, this is Perry speaking now, quote, "Well, that's got to be up to you." He said, "If I asked for money, it would have sounded like a shakedown. And anyway, as one of the four boys said, you don't have enough money to pay us for what you did to us. They ruined our lives. We're all okay. We had good lives, but it wasn't what we planned. And we still bear that burden." In 2012, Emory President James Wagner presented a formal apology to the people of the school that harmed. The book goes that they collected every single name from the Emory University Dental School who had flunked out. The president sent them a personal invitation to them and to their families, right? A public event covered by CNN, covered by most of the major media at Emory, and he said, "I am sorry. We are sorry. We know that Emory can never totally repair the impact and discrimination it had on you more than a half century ago. But we can use this opportunity provided by Dr. Brickman's research to reflect on these events in ways that make us more vigilant." As part of their sorry process, Emory, they hired a professional filmmaker to make a documentary entitled "From Silence to Recognition: Confronting Discrimination in Emory's Dental School History," incorporating Brickman's source material, and showed it at the event. Okay. Quote, "You couldn't get a parking place at Emory that night," Brickman said. "That's how I found out that this story was bigger than Emory." At the apology event in 2012, those that were discriminated against received more than an apology. It was heartfelt. It was done publicly, with the press and TV invited. The apology speech by the president of Emory was too long for me to cite or to give you a handout, but it can be read in full in the book. And if you ever want to listen or hear an apology, that apology is really the mother of all apologies. The book was very, very moving, okay? I had always felt myself, we had always heard that schools discriminated against Jews, okay? And, we never could really put our hands on it, just exactly what was going on. But Perry Brickman, through his research, his efforts, his shoe leather, for want of a better word, proved what we all had always known, that in fact there was major discrimination against Jews at Emory University. The dental school closed sometime in the mid-60s. I'm not sure from reading the book why it closed. It closed, had nothing really to do with the discrimination. It just closed. And Emory University today is has a major medical school in Atlanta, and is in fact a major university in the United States of America. I think you'll all benefit from reading this. It's not a difficult read. It is an emotional read, right? It strips bare some of the feelings of what it means to be discriminated against, what it means to flunk out of school when you know you were doing well and you didn't deserve it. But it's also uplifting in the fact that people somehow find a way to get on with their lives. The worst things can happen to people. And for many of us, flunking out of college and having, your life's dream to become a dentist, okay, and then having to face your parents and your family and people pointing at you, look, he failed out of school. Okay? It was probably pretty emotional and pretty difficult for a lot of us to handle, especially when we were young, when we were in our early 20s. We didn't have that full level of maturity. And when a number of us had to now, back up and find another derech, another way, another profession, another way to pick ourselves up off the floor. But the story is very, very heartwarming in the fact that almost all the Jewish kids who were in fact discriminated against were in fact able to pick themselves up the floor and go on to productive and meaningful lives. So thank you for your attention. I know it's early. I'll take questions. Anybody has any questions, unmute yourself, and I will try to answer them. Again, the book is Extracted. Purchasable on Amazon, $19.95. Not a big price. Okay, any questions? Question here, Helen. No, none at all. None at all. It's a good question. He didn't write that any of the students were attending school under the GI Bill of Rights at all. Okay. So,
Did Dr. Brickman have any political or any media allies throughout this ordeal?
yeah, I said he had the Anti-Defamation League was on his side. Deborah Lipstadt was on his side.
What about the Congress?
No, not so. The government was not involved in any of this. He didn't use any governmental agencies. He didn't go to, there's special commissions. I don't even think those commissions existed at the time. Although they...
Big name media journalists.
Only after the fact, CNN did come very strongly onto his side when his findings were published, and they did do a lot to publicize what happened at Emory. Right, yeah, Sam?
No, that all the big schools discriminated and still discriminate against ethnic Jewish students. It's a long time now they're making a big deal because they found out they could do it to Asians. But we know that it's not. Now, so did this have any effect on the present day? The fact that we know Harvard, Princeton, all these people discriminate at admission level, certainly before now.
So I can't say it's had an effect because, like I say, we all know that discrimination against, Jews, Asians, whites exists. But now, not to sound too political, the colleges can cover it up by claiming now that they're woke. All the colleges are woke now. They don't discriminate against anybody anymore. They're redressing the ills of society and civil society by their admission policies. There are a number of cases now winding, one especially against Harvard, that's ultimately going to make it to the Supreme Court, which was filed by Asians who claim that the Harvard administration, the acceptance school, is discriminating against them because they're quote unquote too many Asians entering Harvard. So it hasn't ended. Maybe some of the victims of it has changed, but it still exists. It still exists. Unfortunately, Jews are always on the wrong side. Before we couldn't get into Jews, we couldn't get into school because we were Jews, and now many of us can't get into school because we're beneficiaries of white privilege. So that's working against us now. Before, it was no good because you were a Jew. Now it's no good because you're white. So it doesn't end. It doesn't end. Right? Not to sound political. Anybody else? Huh?
Anybody on Zoom?
Anybody on Zoom want to ask a question or mute yourself? There's 2 pages, at least of Zoom. Wow. I'm surprised. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Uh, Oh, Dave, you want to talk about the next book review coming up? It's going to be in 2 weeks by Dr. Gerald Felsenthal. And he's sitting right here. The Mechutin of... Bob, you know whose Mechutin he is? Zush and Mati's Mechutin? Okay. Go ahead. We have a Dr. Felsenthal who's going to make some comments.
Before that, Marty, thank you very much. Shkayach.
Downstate medical school accepted a very large class. And for the clinical, I'm making up a number, and they take it in close to 2 months. But they only had space for the clinical use for 1 month. So immediately, 50% of the class, including freshmen. Whether this occurred other places or not, I don't know. Medical school I went to was Albany Medical College. They took in 6 students a year. When I was there for a couple of years, someone I knew pointed out to me, you ever notice every year there were 6 Jewish students and 6 Catholic students. Now they've taken 120, I don't think it's something like that. But that was the way it went. And while I was there, the Department of Medicine had never had a Jewish professor until I was there, and he was professor at the town. There were department chairs that were Jewish. It was the same field I went into, with the physical medicine extension. But these figures, statistics, did occur in all of the professions.
Okay. All right, so we have testimony of somebody that lived it. All right, anybody else? Anything? Again, a good shout out to Larry for putting this together. Thank you, Larry. And Dave. All right, we're all done. Thank you.
We thank everybody for coming or logging on, and we look forward to you all joining us